I've covered animated lower thirds before. In tutorials 19 and 22, I utilised the Titles and Text plugin that comes with Movie Studio and Vegas Pro and used positioning keyframes to achieve the animation. This time, I wanted to show how it can be done differently using track motion. If you're using Vegas Pro, I also wanted to show how a lower third title project can be incorporated into your main project as a nested timeline. Using this method, you could create all your lower thirds as separate projects, then import them into the main project and place them in their correct places on the timeline. If you're a Movie Studio Platinum user, the procedure is different. I'll be dealing with this in part 2. Welcome to part 1 of my 27th tutorial. Before starting on the tutorial, I thought it would be a good idea to give an overview of the procedure. I have to stress that this is my idea of how it should be done. There are other ways, but I've found that this way is simpler and is less likely to produce undesirable results. You should first complete editing the timeline on your main project. This is not entirely necessary, but it'll avoid complications later on. Place markers on your timeline where lower thirds are to be located. It's a good idea to rename the markers and enter the text you intend to display in the lower third. Close your main project down, after saving it of course. Create a new project. This will be the lower third template project. Decide on a basic design and create the lower third. Make sure that all the parameters required for your basic design are set in this project. It'll save you time later on. An important thing to set is the length of the lower third. A reasonable length is about 7 seconds. Save your project with a meaningful name. You need to be able to reliably identify it from within your main project. My suggestion would be to name it something like Lower Third 01. In Windows Explorer, copy this project and paste it multiple times until you have enough projects to populate your timeline with lower thirds. Rename each project so that they can be placed in the correct position in your main project. Again, my suggestion would be Lower Third 01, Lower Third 02, etc. Open your main project, then open Vegas Pro's Explorer tab and locate the first lower third project. Ensure you have an empty track above your main video track and pull this project down onto it. The lower third project will be converted into a nested timeline. Move this nested timeline to your first marker. This is where appropriate naming of your lower third projects pays off. Repeat this procedure for all your remaining lower third projects, placing them at the appropriate places on the timeline. Right-click on the first lower third and select Open Nested Timeline. Make any necessary changes to the lower third. An obvious change would be the text description. I'll cover any other changes that may be required during the tutorial. Return to the parent timeline, that's your main project, using the icon on the timeline toolbar, or press Alt-P. Finally, repeat the process for all the remaining lower thirds. That gives you some idea of what's involved. To save time, I'll skip the mundane tasks, such as creating timeline markers and duplicating and renaming lower third projects. The real meat of this tutorial is firstly, designing the lower third, and secondly, modifying the basic template as necessary. Having said all that, let's get into the tutorial. I have as my main project part of a project I completed earlier this year. I shot the video at a place called Hardknott Roman Fort in Cumbria. Cumbria is a county in northern England with stunning scenery and includes a lake district. I've already put 4 markers on the timeline in positions where I want my lower thirds to be placed. I've renamed them to describe the scenes, and I'll use these descriptions for the text in the lower thirds. Right, I'm now going to create the Titles and Text project, which will act as a template. And obviously the most important thing about a lower third is the text element. So I'll bring down the Titles and Text generated media onto the timeline, pull it to the beginning of the timeline, just open it out of it and move this out of the way. Now, as well as this, I want to create a coloured strip that acts as a background for the text. So I'll just close that down for a second and go to the solid colour media generators, and I will pick grey, pull it down underneath the Titles and Text event. Now the next thing to do is to decide how long the lower third will be in duration. An ideal length is about 7 seconds. So I will change the grey event duration to 7 seconds. And I want to reduce the opacity to about 0.4. I'll do it in here. The reason I do that is I don't want the grey colour to swamp the scene that this is going to cover. So this allows the scene to show slightly through the grey colour. I will now drag the grey event back to the loop point and also drag the Titles and Text event to match, and I'll close that down a second, open the Titles and Text one up and click this icon which will match event length, change that to 7 seconds. Now I want to change the text font, and I found that Times New Roman is a nice clean font which is easy to read, and I will change the size to 14. I like my font to be yellow in colour. Allows it to stand out. So I'll change the font colour to yellow. And also I want to give it an outline. Outline width of 4. And a colour of black. And now I can close this dialog down because I now want to use the track motion. This is the track motion icon. If it isn't showing, you can get it to show by clicking on the hamburger menu and clicking this option and putting a check mark in the track motion option. I'll just open that up and make it bigger. First thing we need to do is to make sure that this icon is selected, blue background. This ensures that the controller cursor follows the timeline cursor and vice versa. Also make sure that the cursor is at the beginning of the timeline. We now have to look at some of these controls here. What I want to do first is to bring the text down to the classic lower third position. To do that, I need to move the track motion controls down in the Y direction. Now the important controls here are the prevent movement X control and the prevent movement Y control. Now at the moment the prevent movement Y control is enabled and the prevent movement X control is disabled. So that means that the only way I can move this frame is in the X direction. In this particular instance, I need to move it down in the Y direction, so I need to disable that one and enable that one. So now I can pull this down to approximately the right position. Once that's in the right position, I can close this down for the minute, because I don't need to do anything with that yet. And I will open it for the colour. Again, I need to take note of these icons. Now with the colour, I need to make a strip that will be behind the text. So I need to move the top of this down and the bottom of this up. Now notice that these two icons here, prevent scaling X and prevent scaling Y, are both enabled. So that will prevent me from moving this box, in effect stopping me from scaling it. So I need to disable the Y one, which allows me to pull this down. We'll leave the X one enabled because I don't want this box moving around in the X direction. So I'll bring that down, looking at the preview window, and get that to approximately the right position, and then move the bottom up till it's about right. That looks about right. Now I need to create the animation for this grey strip. What I want to do is to make it appear in a 15 frame period. So it will start off the screen and then move right onto the screen in 15 frames. So the first thing I'll do is enable this cursor by just clicking in here, and you can see it starts flashing. So I want to go 15 frames to the right. I'm using the keyboard arrow key because it gives me more control. Once I'm 15 frames from the start, I need to add a keyframe. So I'll use this add keyframe or create keyframe icon. So that is the end of the animation. as you can see, there's no animation yet. So what I need to do now is to go to the first keyframe, and I need now to move the grey background strip off the screen to the left. Now remember that I have the prevent movement icon enabled here, so I need to disable that to allow me to move it in the X direction, and enable the Y icon to stop the grey strip from moving up or down. I can now drag the strip off the screen checking the preview screen. There, it's just off the screen. What I did forget to mention is to ensure that you enable this Prevent Scaling Y icon, which stops me inadvertently changing the width of this strip. Once I've done that, I can check the animation to see that it's working okay. Okay, that looks okay there. Now I need to move the playhead to the end of the event, which is there. I'll now move one frame backwards. And add a keyframe. I've noticed I added the keyframe not right at the end of the event, and that's because if you put a keyframe right at the end of the event, it can produce some undesirable results. So it pays to move back one frame and put the keyframe there. Now I need to create the outro, which is the grey strip moving back over to the left and off screen. So I'll enable the cursor again and move 15 frames back. Add a keyframe. Now at the moment there's no animation there, so what I need to do is to move back to the beginning, right click on the keyframe, select copy and go to the end, right click and select paste. I'll go to the beginning of the timeline again and check the animation. That looks good. I'll close the track motion box down. Now I've found that I could make the coloured strip look better, less harsh, by applying the Vegas border effect to it. I'll check the video event effects icon, find Vegas border, unfortunately that's opened on the other screen, so I'll bring that over. I'll leave it at blurred and set the size to 0.088. And you can see that that has made it look better. I'll now open up track motion for the titles and text event. Again, I'll ensure that this icon is selected, and I will bring the playhead, the cursor, back to the beginning of the timeline. Now again, I want the text string to move horizontally, so I need to make sure that this is disabled and that is enabled. I want the text string to start moving onto the screen 10 frames after the grey strip has completed its travel onto the screen. So that's 15 frames plus 10, 25 frames. So I will enable the cursor again and click 25 frames. I'll now add a keyframe there, and that is the start of the text animation. I want the text to move onto the screen in 15 frames, so that means moving another 15 frames. And add a keyframe. And that's the end of the animation. I need now to go to the previous keyframe and move the text off the screen. There. I need to now right click this keyframe, select copy, go to the first keyframe and select paste. Now I need to go to the keyframe where the grey strip starts to go back off the screen, and that is this one here. If I click on that keyframe, that moves the cursor to that point. So that is where the grey strip starts moving off the screen. Now I need the text to start moving, or to be off the screen, sorry, 10 frames prior to that. So I will move the cursor back 10 frames and add a keyframe. Now the text again will take 15 frames to move off the screen. So I need to move back 15 frames. And add a keyframe. By the way, we can expand this timeline to make it easier to see by clicking the plus sign. Now I need to click on the previous keyframe twice. Right click, select copy, click the last keyframe, right click and paste. Now I'll go to the beginning of the timeline and check the animation. Good. I can now close this track motion controller down. I'm ready to save. Save as. I suggest you call it a name that you're going to be able to recognize from the main project. I'm going to call this lower third 01. Now, because I've only got 4 locations on my main timeline, on my main project timeline, I'm going to just continue saving as and increment in the name. So those are my 4 lower third projects, which when imported to the main project timeline will be converted into nested timelines. And that's what we'll do now. Having created my template lower third project and duplicated it a further 3 times, I'm now back in my main project. I'll start by opening the Explorer tab and locating the first lower third project, which is this one, and drag it down onto the timeline. You'll notice I've located it on the marker, and this is where appropriate naming of your lower third projects pays off. I will go to the next one, lower third 02, and pull that down onto the timeline, and repeat for the further 2. I'll now go to the first marker, select it, right click, select rename, and copy that. I'll now select the event, right click it, and select Open Nested Timeline. So now this is the first lower third project, and it is now a nest. The first thing to do is to change the text string on the lower third. Highlight sample text and press Ctrl V. Close that down. Now you'll see straight away that we have a little bit of a problem. Beginning of the timeline, the text is still showing. That's supposed to be off the screen at this stage. So what I need to do is to open up the track motion controller. I'll just open up the timeline, make it easier to see. So we're now at the beginning of the timeline. Ensure that this is selected. I need to pull that text string so that it's off the screen entirely. Check that the prevent movement X icon isn't selected, and just pull that away across the screen. Now I need to copy that, move to the next keyframe and paste it. I also need to move to the last keyframe and paste that as well. I'll now check the animation to make sure it's okay. Oops, bring that back to the beginning of the timeline. Okay, that seems to work okay. I will now close this down, and there's an icon here which will open the parent timeline. I'll get prompted, because I've made changes to the nest, I'll be prompted to save it first. And we're now back in the parent timeline, and I'll just check the animation. That looks good. We're in Preview Auto here, so the animation flows smoothly rather than jerkily. I will now pull out of that one and go to the next one. Now you can see that this nest is too long for the event it's describing, so I need to do something about that. I will pull that to about there and make a note of the length that it needs to be, and that needs to be 5 seconds 13 frames. I also need to copy the description, right click and open nested timeline. I now need to change the length of these two events to reflect the length it should be. So I will open up the media generator box for the titles and text and change this value to 5 seconds 13 frames. While I'm here, I will change the sample text to the text on the original event. Just close that down. This has created loop points on both the events. We'll just leave those there for the time being and open up the track motion for the coloured event. Now I'm just going to open that out a little bit. and I need to use this loop point as a guide to pull these two keyframes back. So I will first select those two keyframes and move them back. And this one needs to be one frame behind that loop point. So we'll see if that's just done it. Yes, that's one frame behind the loop point. I can now drag this event back to the loop point. I now have to do a similar thing with the titles and text track motion. Now this is a little bit trickier because these two keyframes have got to be well away from the other two keyframes. In fact, we know that the last keyframe should occur 25 frames earlier than the last keyframe of the solid colour event. That's this one. I'm going to select these last two keyframes and expand the timeline so that we've got one frame increments. Move that out of the way so I can see the time. Yes, that's one frame increment. I need to find out where 25 frames from the last keyframe of the colour event occurs. 1, 2. So that is 2 frames from the 4-second 10 frame mark there. So I now need to pull these two keyframes along so that the last keyframe occurs at that point there. I can now drag the event back to the loop point and check the animation. Okay, that works. Just one more thing to do, and that is to alter this so that it's off the screen. We're at the first keyframe. The X, prevent movement X, is disabled, so I can now pull that until it's off the screen. Right click on the keyframe, copy, go to the next keyframe, paste. Go to the last keyframe, paste, and check the animation. Good. Oops, didn't want to do that. Press the wrong cross. Return to the parent timeline. Say yes to the changes. What we now have to do is to pull this event back to the loop point and check the animation. There we go. We now have to go to the third one. Position that one. Right click, open nested timeline. By the way, there's another icon here that will do the same thing. I forgot to copy the text. Again, I will have to change the animation so that this text is off the screen, but you now get the idea. Close this down and return to the parent timeline. Say yes. Now to the last one. Now this one more or less describes two scenes. So it's not really necessary to change the length of this event. So I will copy this and go to the nested timeline. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the length of the string nearly reaches the end of the display, which is not really a good thing. So what I think I'll do there is to change the font size to bring that down. I'll just change it to 10 and see what happens there. Right, that's better. Now another thing I can do is to change this strip to something else, and I have in the project media, I believe, no. So what I can do is import that Now, to change this strip without actually creating the keyframes again, I can simply drag the strip away to the right, and the keyframes, as you can see, follow it. Move that a bit further because this event will be 10 seconds long. I'll pull that down. Oh, didn't pull it away far enough. Bring that back to match that. Bring that back. I now need to open the track motion controller. Select all the keyframes and pull them back to the beginning of the timeline. I'll do the same with these two. Now you can see that those keyframes are in the same position but on the green texture. I can now delete the grey strip. Come back to the beginning of the timeline and check the animation. Not quite right. Now you'll remember with the grey strip I applied the border effect to it. I'll do the same with the green strip. So I'll open the effects pane, find the border, click OK. And if I remember rightly, I put that as 0.088. Close that down and check the animation. Yes, that looks better. One more thing to do, and that is to sort this one out. Do it the same way. Check that icon, pull that back, and check the animation. Okay. Well, that's about it. Thanks for sticking this out to the end. You'll appreciate that describing the procedure in detail can give the impression that it's quite complex. I can assure you it's not. Once you understand the basics of track motion, it becomes relatively easy. The lower third example I've described in this tutorial is quite a simple one, but it's one you can use as a template for more complex lower third designs. As always, I thank you for your interest. Please consider subscribing to my channel, and I welcome any comments you may have. Until the next time, bye for now.